delayed gratification can be one of the biggest tools in managing personal finance for sales professionals, because instead of just taking that huge commission check and buying a boat or a jet ski or a new truck, whatever it is, these things that I've seen coworkers do over the years, it's okay, how can I be wise with this to make sure that I'm not reliant on just going to get that next project, right? In the sales world, it's always going to be the next project. It's always going to be, how do I hit my number? But at the end of the day, we also want to make sure personally that you and your family are taken care of from a financial perspective. And so it's important to kind of weigh both of those things equally.
Welcome to the Sales Gravy Podcast. I'm Jeb Blount Jr. filling in for Jeb Blount Sr. And today we're having an amazing conversation with Ben Lex, who's going to walk us through a topic area that I think that most sales professionals need to learn about, need to hear about. Most sales organizations should pay attention to, but we don't, because it's a little bit more personal than maybe we would like it to be. And Ben is an expert in the space, so we're going to learn a lot about finances for sales professionals today. But before we dive into that conversation, if you haven't had a chance to check out Sales Gravy University, go to learn.salesgravy.com. That's learn.salesgravy.com. Sales Gravy University is the world's most powerful sales training engine for sales teams that want 350 plus courses of on-demand content from 40 plus different experts and live training included. So 9+ live training sessions every single month, every week of every month of every year, your team can sign up for. These cover topics from the prospecting end of sales all the way through closing, negotiating. And we even have learning paths that are dedicated to emotional and mental and physical health. So check out Sales Gravy University for your sales team today. That's learn.salesgravy.com. If you haven't taken a course, use the code FREECOURSE at checkout, and you can access one of our courses for free so that you can see the quality of our content. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the podcast. I've talked for the last 20 seconds, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the audience, because you have an incredible background, a background in B2B sales, and now into personal finance and family finance, and working with professionals with their financial planning goals. I think that you have a really unique perspective. So kind of give the audience a little bit of background who you are and why we're having the conversation today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Sales Gravy has been something that I've followed for a number of years, especially back in my time in B2B sales, and have loved your guys' content, love the information that you guys put out. I think it's essential for sales professionals to constantly be consuming information that's going to help them advance. And so I think this will be a really fun conversation. Like you said, I spent 6 years in B2B sales. I traveled around West Michigan and Northern Indiana primarily, and was grateful for that experience. I loved my experience in that space, but truly have a passion for financial planning. It's something I've loved to do personally and individually. And it's a space where when I was working with sales professionals, it was kind of this ominous topic that nobody really wanted to talk about. Nobody wanted to get into. Everybody was okay talking about making more money and selling more to get more commission, but nobody really dove into the essentials behind behavioral finance and strategy behind investing, tax planning, you name it. It was kind of this swept under the rug topic. And it's really, really important, especially in the sales world, because there are some intricacies that most people don't even know about or realize. And so I think this will be a really fun conversation.
I like where you're coming from the perspective that most people are comfortable talking about making more money. I think that is just true for most people in most professions, is that we're mostly comfortable saying, hey, we're going to make more money this year. Fantastic. That's always good news. But sales professionals in particular, obviously that's our job, is to go make money. The challenge is that, and I can speak from experience, you sort of get caught up in the make more money behaviors. And that can be really helpful, except if you're living a lifestyle that complements making more money, you tend to just have to make more money in order to live. And sales is
Correct.
A great pitfall for that. So your
Correct.
experience around that, the mindset and you have some great content on LinkedIn, by the way. So if anyone wants to go and follow Ben on LinkedIn, he's got some amazing posts. The first thing that you kind of talk about is this idea of delayed gratification. You posted this, I think, today, or it was very, very recently. It was, I think,
this
it's the most
week,
recent
yeah.
post. Delayed gratification. This is a difficult topic for salespeople, because salespeople typically, unless you're in very complex enterprise sales, so there is not a blanket statement. There are people who are used to this, but a lot of sales professionals are used to that. Like, hey, it's a 3 or 4 month cycle, or maybe it's 6 months, or maybe it's 2 weeks. Whatever's next, kill whatever's in front of you. That's a very different mindset than what you maybe should have for financial conversations about personal finance. So kind of walk through, your point there of delayed gratification, that this is a superpower of highly successful sales professionals when it comes to their personal financial goals.
So I was fortunate enough, and I have been fortunate enough over the last few months to interview really successful sales professionals, some that I've worked with in the past, some that I've just engaged with and kind of networked with over the years. And I was really just kind of entering this curious to see what their thoughts were on how did the best sales professionals manage their money, right? There's a capacity for being a great sales professional. There's a capacity for managing your money well. There's not always both, right? A lot of times you have one or the other. And a lot of times some of the best sales professionals are the worst with managing their personal finances. And they have, like you said, this mindset of, I'm just going to go get that next project, go get whatever it is so that I can pay for whatever I want. And while I understand that thought process, right, I've been in the sales world before, it can be a dangerous place to be, because you're constantly needing to sell more to buy, to consume the things that you want, right? And so there's a balance to it, and there's a place where that's okay. But what I found from these conversations with these sales professionals is that the best thing that you could do is delay gratification, right? When you're in a space, when you're in a world, and this is what I do in financial planning, is how do we figure out, we don't even know how much you're going to make at the end of the year, right? We have no clue, right? And the more commission that you have, the bigger question mark that you have, right? With that, it could be anywhere from $80,000 to $500,000, right? And so how do you plan for that? How do you coordinate for that? And it's a really fun game. I love it. I've always been variable income. I've never had just a set, W-2 for the year. And so it's fun for me to live in that space. It's really the space that I know so well. But how do you take this variable income and how do you plan around it? And one of the big takeaways that I found from those conversations is that delayed gratification can be one of the biggest tools in managing personal finance for sales professionals, because instead of just taking that huge commission check and buying a boat or a jet ski or a new truck, whatever it is, these things that I've seen coworkers do over the years, it's okay, how can I be wise with this to make sure that I'm not reliant on just going to get that next project, right? In the sales world, it's always going to be the next project. It's always going to be, how do I hit my number? But at the end of the day, we also want to make sure personally that you and your family are taken care of from a financial perspective. And so it's important to kind of weigh both of those things equally when we're talking about that.
So as far as that practicing delayed gratification as a tool for making sure that I love this, making sure that you as a sales professional and your family, if you have a family, are well taken care of, because there are months where some people go without any commission checks. Some people get paid quarterly. Some people get paid monthly, which is fantastic. Some people get paid annually, depending on what sort of role you're in. And I think that, maybe that quarterly or even annual commission can feel really susceptible to spending because you don't get it. So it's sort of like a treat. But there are a lot of professionals who spend that commission check as like their income. And then, of course, you're chasing the next project and things are, sputtering along, and then you don't have any extra income because you didn't make any sales, you didn't make enough sales, and you've developed a lifestyle that requires that extra $2,000 on top of your salary if you have one, or the extra $5,000, or the extra $20,000, depending on your role. What does that look like? Like, how do you help sales professionals balance between, I got to find the next project and meet my numbers for the sales organization or for the business that they work for, and delaying gratification? What does that functionally look like?
So you almost have to compartmentalize those two things. So one of those, right, hitting your number, finding those next projects, whether it be through prospecting, whether it be through cross-selling and upselling at existing businesses, there's always going to be that component to succeed at your job, right? To be not only proficient, but be a great sales professional, be an asset to not only your organization, but also the organizations that you're selling to. Right. And so that is one motive. And I think every sales professional out there wants to try to be the best version of themselves, to move their career forward, to, maybe move into management, maybe move into product specialties, depending on what field you're in. Maybe it's moving to a different company, right? There's a whole slew of reasons. But salespeople are competitors, right? They want to win. They want to win the business. They want to be competitors out, as well as be one of the best in their organization, which is one thing that sets salespeople apart, right? And so you almost have to compartmentalize that away from personal finance, right? You can have that piece while also still focusing on the delayed gratification piece. And there's one crutch of this conversation that makes it really easy to have delayed gratification. And if you have done this well, it's a little bit easier. And if you haven't done this well, it becomes more challenging, right? And that is just making sure you have enough emergency savings, emergency funds, whatever you want to call it, in the bank so that you're not stressing about that next commission check, right? You're still going to want to go get it because you want to hit your number. You want to do as good as you can. But at the same time, personally, you're not hurting if it doesn't happen, right? Like I think any sales professional has been in that spot where they were banking on a massive project and probably already counting their commission. And then at the last second, it gets swept out under the rug or whatever happens. If you're relying on that, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
If you've got no money in the bank preparing for that, especially when you're in variable income, your emergency fund becomes far, far more important than any other field out there, right? Any variable income space, the emergency fund becomes really, really important and essential. And if you have that in place, delayed gratification is super easy because you already have your safety net, right? And so then that creates more options that you can create with your commission versus being strapped with whatever you've already allocated that money for.
I like this as a parallel to your pipeline, right? If you're a sales professional, if you have an anemic pipeline, you don't have the opportunity to swing the bat at enough pitches to hit the ball, right? So if you have a full pipeline, you don't necessarily need every swing at the plate to mean something, and therefore you're more likely to close because you don't need it as much. Now, I love this as a mental wake up for people who may be listening to this podcast, or an affirmation of people who've been doing the right things, right? If you have a safety net, if you have your savings in place, if you have that emergency fund, you are in a place where you don't need, you have a desire to go close more deals, more projects, to make more commission, to make more money. But your next month is not live or die. It's okay, I need to get back on the track. 2 months, you're still not live or die. Need to get back on the track. And then therefore, you have a little bit more, like you said, options. You have more cushion. An emergency fund, it feels elementary to talk about. However, I think that this is a really important topic that people gloss over. They go, "Oh yeah, I know emergency fund. I know what this is. I know how this works. Save money. I know, Jeb. Like I've heard this before. I've listened to the Ramsey show. He just tells me to save money, right? But it's a lot harder than people think, and I think it's so tied into this delayed gratification. And I'm a sales guy through and through. I like shiny commission checks and I like shiny cars, and that's why my wife doesn't let me buy vehicles, right? So like I can't go do those things for a reason, but I am that impulsive with it. An emergency fund took a lot of mental effort because at first it feels so futile. I think you get like first couple grand in the bank, $2,000 or so, and you're like, all right, well, what is this saving me from? Like 4 tires, like if I have to replace my tires. So as a financial advisor, you're working with sales reps, you're working with people with variable incomes. What does an emergency fund look like for them, comparative to maybe somebody who just has a fixed income and is filing a W-2 every year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is why I love working in the space, is because when you talk about the sales space, there's so many different sectors of sales, industries, and everyone's pay structure is so different, right? You've got people that are full commission and high income earners. You've got full commission, low to moderate income earners. You've got base salary plus commission. every commission structure is different and what it pays out. And it's really fun to get into the nitty gritty in that. Right. But it is going to have some bearing on this. Right. And so before we're talking about even an emergency fund, we talk about, everyone's heard it on the Ramsey show. But one of the things I always like to call out with salespeople, I see so often, and it's not just salespeople, it's everybody, but carrying a ton of high interest debt. Right. And so there's a level of, before we even enter this substantial emergency fund conversation, we need to figure out how to take care of this high interest debt. Right. I've known plenty of coworkers over the years who have just carried massive credit card balances and have high interest car loans and so on and so forth. And so the lifestyle has already creeped beyond where it, maybe should have been originally. And so we kind of have to backtrack and take care of some of that stuff first.
Yeah.
Right. And so save up a little bit, cover your bases, but go back and take care of some of that high interest debt before we really enter this conversation of what I would consider to be a substantial emergency fund. And so then once we get there, you kind of have to look at your situation and figure out, okay, am I someone who's fully commissioned is going to probably need a more substantial emergency fund than somebody who has a decent base salary and is commissioned on top of that. Right. So if you're fully commissioned, you're probably going to want upwards of 6 months of emergency fund savings. If you have a base salary plus commission, and let's say you've budgeted to a point where that you can live on your base salary, awesome. I would say 3 months is great. And then the other thing you have to look at is how specialty is your sales field. How hard would it be for you to find a comparable job if you happen to lose your job, right? No salesperson ever goes in with that mindset, but we have to also look at the reality. And my job is risk management. And so we have to always plan for the worst case scenario, even though it likely will never happen and hopefully will never happen. We need to be covered in case it does. And so, if you have a family is another indicator. If you have a family and kids, I'm always a proponent of a little bit larger emergency savings. If you are single, you have a base salary plus commission, you're probably fine writing a much lower, closer to 3 months. I've known some people where it's made sense to have close to 9 to 12 months of living expenses because their spouse didn't work, they have multiple kids, and they're in a very specialty area of sales that it would probably take them about 6 months to find a new job if they happen to lose theirs.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing you bring up in that first part is, the debt piece. Thinking about an emergency fund, it is important to understand your risk. You understand, your lifestyle. If you're single, if you have just a partner, or if you have a family, those things can affect how much savings you need. Typically for an emergency fund, you're like you said, about 3 months just to make sure that you have, you're not screwed if something happens. But
absolutely,
you might need a year, depending on your area. But that lifestyle creep, this is something that, I can speak to from experience. I carried a lot of high interest debt very early on in my career because I think that there is just so much temptation, especially when you're the one and you're a younger sales professional. Maybe you don't have a spouse or a partner, or maybe you don't have tons of responsibilities to like a household. So it's just you and you're the one person in your sort of group that got into sales, and you're making a lot more money than other people. It's just like early on, you can see those differences. It starts to even out later on in life, and you start realizing that keeping up with the Joneses was not a good idea. But that lifestyle creep, I'm sure you've experienced, or at least you've had conversations with people who had a lot of high interest debt across credit cards, cars, things like that. How did you coach them, or how did you observe them, the successful ones, take that creep, go from a bad situation, and then turn that around and fix it so that they could get the emergency fund? And then we'll sort of dive into the next piece, which is the fun stuff, which is how do you actually make more money with the money that you have?
Right.
How do you just have enough money to live? What did you see those people sort of take responsibility of, or do in their lives that helped them reduce the amount of lifestyle creep and get back to where they were fundamentally sound?
Yeah. So one of my sales managers over the years, who I have a lot of respect for, always had the phrase, we give ourselves our own raise, right? And so one of the beauties about being in sales is you do give yourself your own raise, right? If you have some sort of commission structure where if you sell more, you make more, you have the ability to work a little bit harder, go find more projects, and eventually that's going to lead to a larger pipeline and more sales, right? And so that's the beauty in this conversation is most salespeople have a pretty large shovel. When we're talking about getting out of debt, there's two pieces. There's how big is the pile and how big is your shovel, right? And typically we want a large shovel and a small pile or no pile, right? But that's not always the case, right? And so when we talk about this for salespeople, especially heavy commission, the beauty here in the conversation is you have some say in how large your shovel is, right? And so you can go make more to dig yourself out of the situation a little bit faster. And so it comes down to discipline. It comes down to what we talked about before and delayed gratification. Delayed gratification and lifestyle creep really complement each other, right? Because if you increase your lifestyle, right, you essentially don't have delayed gratification in that case, right? Because of lifestyle creep, you want that nicer truck or the boat or the lake house, right? Whatever it is, you're going to dig yourself into a little bit of hole that's going to be harder to climb out. And so when we're talking about high interest debt, we want to try to knock that out as fast as possible and really just let's increase the shovel. Let's try to figure out how we can get more income allocated to paying this off, because in the financial planning world, it's all about how can we get as much investment gain, right? And so we talk about maybe your portfolio might get 8, 9, 10, 11% growth, right? But when we're talking about high interest debt, you're talking about negative 20+%, right? If we're talking about credit cards, it's usually high 20s, personal loans, home equity loans, a lot of times are upwards of 10%, right? And so you're essentially negating your investment returns, if not significantly more in the case of credit cards, right? And so it's how can we backtrack? How can we allocate more money, be disciplined, maybe minimize our lifestyle for a little bit, for a short period of time, so that we can kind of get back on the rails and take care of the fun stuff, right? The investment, how do we actually grow wealth for you? And it's really hard to do if you're balancing a ton of high interest debt.
I just can speak to this from experience. I carried a lot of it, and luckily, as a sales professional, if you're listening to this podcast, you do have a larger shovel than I would say most people outside of that very particular profession in sales. And there's a lot of other professions that can have a large shovel, but this is the one that you're in. So,
Right.
Speaking from experience, I mean, it took me way less time than I thought. I had a situation where we just we're living a little bit outside of our means, and that credit card was starting to use a little bit more. You just needed it for this, you needed it for that. And I look up and it's been 2 years and you've got a big pile. And suddenly that first home or the car that you wanted, or moving to a different area, or the lake house, or whatever those dreams were, become very far away. The options are very limited when you have a lot of high interest debt. Not only can you not get more money, you cannot get loans if you are not doing that well. It also creates a ton of stress in your life. Like, there's so much psychology behind becoming debt free that just gives you so much more ability to connect with other people. You're not stressed about where the next money's coming from. You're not, spending, like you said, you could be losing ROI. You're literally in negative ROI with 20% interest rate, when even if you have an investment portfolio that's pretty strong, if you're just taking that away, it took me 5 months to take care of it. And it was delayed gratification. I went, okay, if every commission check that I have from here on out is only going towards making this more stable, within 5 months, I was a different person. Like, you can ask anyone in my life, I was a nicer, more caring, just genuinely nicer person to be around. They liked my energy more, and the amount of stress I had was so diminished that I was doing better in all other parts of my life. So if you have a lot of high interest debt, take care of it as soon as you can. Now I want to get into the fun stuff. So now that you've taken care of it and you're a financial expert, you're working with sales professionals, they have that variable income, they have that big shovel, and I think that it's important to maybe start with stop investing in the wrong places. With 9%, maybe you have a 9% yield and you have 20% high interest. You're really negative 10%, 11% in the whole. How do you sort of help sales professionals diversify, look at their commission checks as delayed gratification for future goals? Like, what does that conversation look like, sound like, and then kind of walk through how you help put the pieces together?
Yeah. So when we get into this conversation of financial planning, it all comes back to a goals, priorities, and values conversation, right? And that's not going to be the same for everybody. It's not the same for everybody, right? From person A to person B, it's going to be different. You probably think and feel different than your neighbor. You have different values. You have different goals. You have different pursuits. You also have different incomes and you have different lifestyles, right? Nothing's cookie cutter in this world, which makes it really fun, but it can make it challenging at times as well, because you don't want to just take the approach that your coworker is taking that happens to be working for them, because it may not work for you, as well as it may not align with your goals and values. And so the first step in this conversation is always sitting down and having a conversation. If you're married, it's with both spouses. If you're single, then it's just figuring out, what are your values? What are you hoping to accomplish at the end of the day? Because if we don't know what we're aiming for, we have no idea where we're shooting, right? And so it's super important. It's the same way in sales, right? If you have no idea what your target is for the year, you don't know what you're trying to accomplish. There's so much value in just kind of setting a goal, right? Looking out and saying, okay, this is where I need to be. I need to sell X amount of dollars for the quarter to end up here for the year to make my year, right? Or if I want to, do 120% for the territory, whatever it may be, you have a goal, you have a target, and then you can kind of backtrack to figure out how you want to get there. And so it's the same thing with financial planning is, when do you want to retire, right? If I'm talking to somebody in their mid 30s, when do you want to retire? Do you want to retire at 50? Do you want to retire at 55, at 60, at 65, right? That's probably the number one indicator. But then it's also backtracking to figure out, okay, how much do you need in retirement, right? Factor in inflation, factor in, how much can we allocate? How much can we invest here and there? And so it really is starting with the end in mind. What are your goals? What are your values? I talk to some people that think they're going to work the rest of their life and want that and really enjoy their work. And I talk to some people who are trying to get out of it as fast as possible. Some people that are trying to just invest so much that they can retire early and kind of, get out of the race, right? And there's no right or wrong in the conversation. It's taking that information, setting the goal, setting the target, and then backtracking to figure out, okay, what steps do we need to take to make this happen, right? Yep. And so we talked about it. It's, if you've got any high interest debt or anything like that, okay, let's take care of that first, right? While also balancing it with investing for your future, and then throw in any and all the other goals you could put on there, right? We want to buy a lake house in the future. We want to, we need to replace my wife's car. We need to do X, Y, and Z. We want to save for kids' college. We want to do charitable giving. And, there's any number of indicators that we can also throw into the mix. But then that kind of gives us our timeline. It gives us our goal that we can shoot for and plan around.
I want to hit on a topic that you can maybe provide some insight into, which is, typically when you think of financial planning, you think of goals and you go, okay, well, assets and money, right? So assets and investments. I want a lake house. I want a new car. I want, $2 million in the bank when I retire, or whatever that looks like. But you mentioned a couple of different areas that you can financially plan for that are important, that I don't know if a lot of people think about initially, at least I haven't, which is charitable giving, emergencies, or obviously things like college people plan for. But, what are some areas that you've seen or helped people plan for in their lives that weren't necessarily the, I want to go buy a lake house style of planning?
And it could be anything and everything. But you can only do three things with money, right? You can spend it, you can save it, and you can give it. At the end of the day, it really is that simple. And so it's figuring out what do you value most. I love the topic of charitable giving. There's a ton of strategies around charitable giving within the financial planning realm that I can get into with clients. And it's an area that I love. I love to work with clients that have huge generosity goals, right? And so maybe that becomes part of their estate plan, right? So instead of just giving money to the kids, they also want to give a portion of their estate to a church or a charity or an organization that has meant a lot to them over the years. And I think that's incredible. It's stuff that we can build into the plan, right? College planning is obviously a big one. It's a hot topic. But when we talk about this, it's also really, really important to kind of zoom out for a second, because I find a lot of people that are doing good things, but not necessarily in the best order. Right. And so I find a lot of people that are saving for their kids' college, yet they're not contributing near enough to their retirement. Right. And so it's kind of this concept, and you've heard it before in a lot of different facets. It's, if a plane's going down, you need to put on your mask first before you can help other people. Mm-hmm. Right. And so there truly is this concept, and it's not selfish. I think sometimes people can take it on as being conceited or selfish. It's making sure that you're taken care of so that you can actually take care of other people. And so I'm a huge proponent of college savings, right? But if you're not saving enough for your retirement, and you're, in 20 years, 30 years, going to rely on your kids to take care of you, you're doing them a disservice by not taking care of yourself. Right. And so if that's on track, great, then we can have the college planning conversation. But if we're doing all these other things that might not be bad, but maybe just in the wrong order. And so there is a level of strategy involved with it as well, to figure out what your priorities are, and then figure out, kind of tier them, right? What's our top priority? What's our second, third, and fourth priorities? And then make sure that we're actually moving in the right direction.
I like this prioritization, like take care of yourself before you can you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. It is really important to prioritize what you are planning to either save for and invest in, or, have goals for charitable giving, for example. I mean, if you want it to be part of your estate, that has to be something you plan for today, not at the end, right? Because that's a very difficult place for both your financial advisor to be in, but also for your family. And I like, sitting down with somebody, maybe it's just your spouse, and you sit down and go, okay, what do we value, and what do we want to get done most importantly? And I like those three areas that you mentioned. I'm going to have you repeat them because they're so powerful. I'm glad you mentioned them. The three things you can do with your money, right? You can spend it, you can save it, and you can give it.
That's right.
It's that simple. I love that. As far as investing goes, one of the things I observe around salespeople and the conversations I have around the water cooler and at the coffee station, and with people in my network, we all start talking about investing. It's a hot topic. Everyone loves investing. Typically, salespeople have a little bit of a nose for investing and gambling. Maybe not so much success with it, but it's like this. It's betting on sports. We love to think we have all the knowledge. And they get Robinhood, or they get, the E-Trade, and it's so much easier to invest today than it was 25 years ago. You have to call somebody 25 years ago. You don't have to talk to anybody and throw your money at the stock market. And salespeople have sort of this like Wolf of Wall Street, like if I just start investing, I'm going to be good. How do you sort of think about jumping into the market at time in the market, investing in stocks, ETFs, different kinds of investments that maybe aren't firm assets? When do you start to have that conversation with a sales professional after they've, gotten rid of their debt and gotten in a place where they're looking at getting an ROI?
Yeah. So there is an order, and it's not the same for everybody, right? With somebody who's a W-2, has a consistent income, we could kind of sit down and we could say, okay, this is what your income is. We know this is what your household income is going to be at the end of the year. And so we can plan accordingly. And it's great. It's really simple. It's really cut and dry. And they can have some complexities too, but we know exactly where you're going to be from an income, from a tax bracket standpoint. And so we know what strategies we can implement. And that's great. We don't have that convenience in the sales world, right? Because we don't know how much you're going to make at the end of the year. And so it's important to have, I'll say, relatively frequent or just consistent communication with the professionals that you have in your corner. So I'm a huge proponent of having a financial advisor and a tax professional that work together for the good of the person, right? And are working to make sure that that individual is as efficient, we'll say, as they can be from a financial perspective. And that should be the case. It's the service I always try to provide to my clients as well. But it becomes really, really important because, again, we don't know how much we're going to make, right? And so tax planning around that or figuring out what investment strategy we want to take is going to kind of shift. It's going to fluctuate as the year goes on. And then as the year gets towards the end, we can kind of make some solidified plans. And, if you're going to make $100,000, great. If you're going to make 300, well, now we instantly just moved over the limit to contribute to a Roth IRA, for example, right? And so had we contributed to a Roth IRA at the beginning of the year, we would have had to back work all of that, which is just a massive headache. And then, potentially could have done a backdoor Roth or even a mega backdoor Roth. There's different strategies, but we don't know that at the beginning of the year, right? And so it's not the same for everybody, but usually the rule of thumb is most employers will do a match. In the sales realm, I've yet to find an employer that doesn't match on a 401k or employer plan, right? And so that's free money, right? Most people have heard that that's pretty basic stuff, right? But if you are not contributing to your employer 401k, getting the match, that's always a starting point, right? It's kind of the no-brainer. At least do this first, and then we can talk about what strategies we want to admit, and we want to implement outside of and beyond that, right? And that's where we can kind of have some fun and play to investing. But it is interesting. I'll talk to a number of people that will come to me and they'll have their Robinhood accounts or whatever it is, and either they've made great decisions or they made horrible decisions. And I don't know what it is with salespeople, but for some reason I always see that they're, invested in individual stocks. And so it is essentially gambling, right? I mean, that's kind of where it plays, but it's not diversified, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing. And by no means is this specific investment advice to everybody, but, for compliance purposes, got to throw that out there. But diversification is so, so, so important when we're talking about investing in the stock market, because it is a volatile realm, right? The stock market on the whole, nobody knows what it's going to do tomorrow, right? And so making sure that you are diversified, right? Again, my goal at the end of the day is risk management. And I want to make sure, even worst case scenario, if we stick to this plan, you're going to be able to achieve the goals of whatever it is, retirement at 55 or 60. I'm not trying to play the lottery. I'm not trying to hit that one winner, right? Because to hit that one winner, you're probably going to pick a whole lot of losers, right? And so there is a strategic approach that's necessary. It involves and heavily weights around diversification and also just what you're comfortable with from a risk level. Everybody's different in that too. And so you got to take a number of things into account when we're talking about investing, and really just see where you at from an income level, a tax bracket standpoint. What are your goals at the end of the day that we're trying to achieve and shoot for? And then the third piece on there, I would say, is that investing is not meant to be an emotional thing, right? It is for a lot of people, and I understand that, but investing is a long-term game, and it's not intended to be emotional, right? We make decisions and we invest strategically for the good of the client, right? And so, that's why diversification plays in, right? And that's why we look at all of these different facets of your financial life to make sure you're actually moving in the right direction and you're not making a decision that's going to hinder you 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah, I think that's sound non-financial advice, for the legal purposes. And one of the situations that personally I can speak to as I found myself in, as I had, debt, high yield debt, high interest debt, sorry, not high yield, high interest debt. And I had a large Robinhood account. Like I was doing fairly well investing, but I was totally neglecting my personal financial health by doing the right thing while doing the completely wrong thing. So I was living beyond my means and investing, right? So you can't do both of those things. Just
Yeah.
if you hear anything, if you hear nothing else to hear this today, if you go to your financial advisor like Ben with $50,000 in your investment account and on Robinhood, he's going to be very happy. If you then follow that up with, I've got $50,000 in high interest debt, he's going to roll his eyes because you are at negative 10% of your ROI. That is not great risk management. So I love that. That's where, that's where you sit and what you've seen. I think it's been a helpful fundamental conversation for sales professionals and learning about, what fundamentals have to get done before you can start talking about the fun stuff. Then the fun stuff happens and you have to think about how you're going to go about that, setting goals, really keeping yourself accountable, delayed gratification, some of the financial fundamentals. But as an expert, in the last few minutes, if you're going to give salespeople, hey, these are the red flags, like don't do these things, or these are the green flags, like absolutely do these things. What's your bullet list of advice that people should run away with?
Yeah. So I think this whole conversation hinges on the foundation of what we would consider behavioral finance. And so it's making sure that your financial house is in order. It's making sure that your budget is created. And maybe you're not a budget person. That's fine. Having a rough idea of what you have coming in and what you have going out. Because if you have no idea what your cash flow is, you can't make much progress beyond that, right? You don't know where to go next if we don't know what our cash flow is, right? And so start there, figure out what your cash flow is, how much money you have coming in, how much money you have going out. And it's going to depend on if you have a salary or if you're strictly commissioned, but there's ways to create a budget nonetheless, whether you get paid monthly, quarterly, annually, doesn't matter. There's a strategy that you can implement to figure this out. So once we get that in order, once we make sure we're not leaning into the lifestyle creep, we're delaying gratification and only buying things when we can actually afford them, right? Salespeople have an amazing, amazing opportunity to build wealth and build wealth fast. And the younger you are listening to this, the more excited you should be about this conversation. Even if you have some of that credit card debt or high interest debt, we don't say that, we don't talk about it negatively to shame you, but just to, kind of display the weight of, hey, let's get this stuff taken care of. And so that we can actually build towards something that's productive and beneficial for you. And salespeople are uniquely positioned because of commission, because of potentially large commissions to supercharge some of that, right? So let's talk about in the year 2024, for example, you can contribute $7,000 to an IRA. If you're over 50, you can contribute an extra $1,000, right? You can max out your 401k at 23,000 of your own individual contributions, right? And then you're going to have a potential employer match on top of that. And so we're talking about a potential that's just between those two accounts, $30,000+ that you could invest towards retirement each and every year. Most people don't have those opportunities, right? Doctors, sure. Natural high income earners, right? Great. But salespeople have that unique opportunity where maybe you have a great year and you take advantage of it, and the next year's not as great. And that's okay. We'll still do what we can and still allocate where we can. But then maybe the next year you have another great year and you can do that again, right? And so the beauty of being able to adapt your plan, evolve it, by no means taking a blanket approach every year and just saying, hey, I'm going to do this every single year because it may not be what's best for you. And then get a team of people that are in your corner and know what they're doing, right? So find a financial planner who's not going to just sell you into products, right? Find someone who's actually invested in your benefit and your growth and your development and your wealth building process. Find a tax planner who's going to do the same, right? Who's proficient in their field and knows how to be help you be tax efficient, right? Because if you're a high income sales professional, you're going to pay a lot of taxes, right? Like I've had those hefty tax bills at the end of the year and they're not fun.
Yeah.
Right. And so finding people that are in your corner, find a sales coach, right? If you need help to move forward, right? Find resources and education that's going to help you advance your career. And so I love working with salespeople. They're a lot of fun. They have fun, unique challenges, but also a ton of really, really good opportunities that they can leverage.
Like, yeah. Anyone who's in sales listening to this has seen the taxation on commissions, and we're all sweating right
It's
now
not
thinking about it.
fun.
It's
It's
not
not
fun at all.
fun.
All right, so I've got one last question for you. But before we
Yeah.
do that, if you're listening to this, head over to Sales Gravy University, the most powerful sales training platform on the internet, in the universe, for sales professionals, for both on-demand and live training for your sales team. If you haven't checked out any classes before, go to learn.salesgravy.com. That's learn.salesgravy.com. Use the code FREECOURSE at checkout. You can take any of our courses for free. And then if you are interested in getting your team signed up, this is called a Sales Gravy University Team Hub. You can reach out to us via the chat function, or reach out to our team at salesgravy.com, and we'll have a conversation with you. Again, learn.salesgravy.com. Use the code FREECOURSE. All right, last question before I let you get back to your day, Ben. What advice would you give to somebody who listens to this conversation? Maybe they're in a place where they're like, okay, I haven't looked at my budget, haven't created a budget, haven't looked at the expenses, haven't looked at the income because I'm afraid. Like, instinctively, they know that things aren't going the right way, but they are in a place where there's a lot of time left. How would what would you tell them to focus on in order to start executing on this plan? It all sounds great. It all sounds easy. It sounds fundamental. It's simple, right? There's three things you can do with your money. You can save it, you can spend it, you can give it, pay off your debt. Easy enough said, right? But it seems easy in theory, and then when rubber hits the road, in the financial world, it can be a lot harder than people may have expected. So, what would you tell somebody in that space?
Yeah. So there's two primary things that I would say to that person. And the first is just start. And the second is to find accountability, right? Your financial situation's not going to get any better if you don't start looking at it. Even if it's not great, I'm a huge proponent of not looking at your situation and feeling shame or guilt around where you're at, right? Where you're at is where you're at. Okay. Right. And once you establish where you're at, you can actually start making moves to work back to where you want to be. But if you have no point established from where you're at, even if it's not great, even if it's a ton of credit card debt or, a super high auto loan, whatever it may be, unless you just sit down and establish that, figure it out, you're never going to be able to make the progress to where you want to be. And so don't look at it as a guilt or shame component. If you're waiting until the timing is perfect, it's never going to be perfect, right? I say that with everything, right? Like the best time to start investing was yesterday. The next best time is today. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best time is today, right? That old adage, but it rings true, is if you never start, right, you're just going to keep pushing it off. And so as hard as it may be, as challenging as it may be, just jump in. And then the other piece of it is find accountability, find somebody that you trust, right? So maybe it's a financial advisor, maybe it's not, maybe it's a family member or something that is good with their finances, is not going to come in with a place of judgment or harshness to it, but just come in and say, okay, let's get this taken care of, let's get this cleaned up. And so pairing that plan with the accountability is super important.
Yeah.
To jump in, dive in, even if it's not fun, it's what's going to allow you to actually be where you want to be 30 years from now, instead of still being on the track to getting there.
I agree with that. Just getting started. It was the thing that changed my life. And I can tell you that I didn't look at the finances. Typical sales guy, maybe not a typical sales person, but typical sales guy, just spent money, made money. You know what? It was working out just fine. And that's what it felt like. Like I was making enough money and I was spending money, and things weren't crazy out of hand. I wasn't flying to Vegas and spending $10,000 at the gambling table. I wasn't doing anything crazy. But those small incremental mistakes, like you want to call them, they almost not mistakes. They're just decisions that you make, right? So consequences, right? To decisions that you make over time. And that small spending, that small splurge, that little bit of luxury you have here and there. Maybe you got a new vehicle. Maybe you went, hey, I'm going to buy that BMW M3 series. don't do that. But if you did, and you got it because it's a nice, sweet little car, and I totally get it. If you made those decisions, it can suddenly feel very crushing, and that now you're underwater. Well, best not to look. If you're drowning, don't know that you're drowning, and then you'll stay afloat. I mean, there's a lot of people who just have that mindset. Just start doing it. Like, just take a look at it, build the budget, build some kind of budget, hey, this is how much I'm spending a month, and this is how much I'm making a month. Even if you don't like line item everything, just know what it typically is. Suddenly that decision to buy the $75 steak at the restaurant on that night just doesn't seem like such a good decision when you realize that your expenses are outweighing your income. So just start saving some money, start putting into a 401k, start building the life that you want to. If it's $15 a month you put into a savings account, or you put into your 401k, if it's $10, if it's 2 cents you can spare, I think that those things add up, and you'll feel better over time if you just start. So, Ben, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining the Sales Gravy podcast. And for those listening, thank you for joining us. Ben, for people who want to learn more, want to help themselves, maybe help others, where can they find you? What's the best place to reach you at, and so that they can get connected?
Yeah, a couple of places. LinkedIn is a place that I'm fairly active. Ben Lex, BenLex, LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can email me directly. And I'm always happy to have a conversation. It is benlex@ffadvisor.com. And I'd be more than happy to just even have a conversation.
Lovely. Ben, wonderful to have you on the show. Those listening, go check him out. He's got some great content and lots to learn from, especially if you are in the sales profession, thinking about your financial journey. Make sure that you are paying attention to the people who are going to help you, and Ben is one of those people. So thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll see you all next time on the Sales Gravy podcast.